Usually when we talk about a massive global event like a World Cup, the spotlight just immediately snaps to the traditional giants, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Brazils, the Frances, the Germanys. Yeah.
Exactly. But as we look at the immense, sprawling scale of the 2026 tournament across North America, there is this really fascinating, almost inevitable collision course developing between two entirely different narratives.
Yeah, it's a huge
It
contrast.
really is. I mean, on one side, you have the United States, and they are playing on home soil, armed with, well, arguably the most talented athletic generation they have ever produced.
Right, the golden generation, as they call
Yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly. And then on the other side, you have Uruguay. And this is a team that, mainstream media constantly mislabels, but that hardcore data analysts just absolutely fear.
Oh, they're terrifying if you actually look at the underlying numbers. I mean, it really is the ultimate test of two competing philosophies.
For sure.
You have this young, energetic host nation, right? And they are so eager to prove they finally belong at the elite table. And they are squaring off against a battle-hardened, structurally impenetrable tournament survivor, a team that is practically engineered to crash host parties.
I love that phrase, engineered to crash host parties.
Yeah.
So today in this deep dive, we're going to unpack exactly how these two teams operate, why their tactical identities are on this collision course, and why the vast geography of North America might actually be the ultimate wild card.
It's going to be a great discussion.
Yeah. But before we get into the tactical mechanics of it all, a really quick reminder for you listening. If you want to follow all of our new content and encourage the team here to keep providing these deep dives, please subscribe to the channel.
Yes, definitely do that.
And also, we want to invite you to participate in our match prediction challenge. And we want to be crystal clear right up front here. Subscribing to the channel and entering the contest is 100% free.
Totally free.
Right, the prize money comes directly from the channel's profits, not from the contestants' pockets. It's just a really great risk-free way to get involved and test your knowledge against ours.
Exactly. So, to understand how the United States and Uruguay are going to perform when the lights are brightest, we really first have to look at the incredibly different paths they took just to reach this point.
Yeah, the contrast is wild.
It is. I mean, the privilege of hosting a tournament changes the entire ecosystem of a national team, starting, years in advance.
Okay, let's unpack that, because the whole host privilege thing is such a fascinating double-edged sword.
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, the United States didn't have to play a single meaningful World Cup qualifier.
Right. They bypassed the entire grueling regional gauntlet.
Yeah. And because of that automatic entry, their coach, Mauricio Pochettino, has had the absolute luxury of testing, I think it's over 60 different players in various friendlies and training camps over the last couple of years.
Which is, quite frankly, an unprecedented level of experimentation for a national team leading up to a major tournament.
Yeah, you never get that kind of time.
You really don't. Usually a manager is basically fighting for their job every single month to secure qualification points. And that means you have to play your established veterans even when they are exhausted or, slightly out of form just to survive.
Right, just to get the 3 points.
Exactly. But the U.S. didn't have to do that. They could cast this massive net to find the perfect tactical fits without any real pressure.
And we saw the result of that net recently, right? I mean, the U.S. men just demolished a reserve-heavy Uruguay side 5-1 in a friendly match down in Tampa.
Yeah, that was a statement game.
It was. And the crazy thing is, it wasn't even the established U.S. stars doing the heavy lifting. You had these young hopefuls stepping up, like Alex Freeman, who has just exploded onto the scene, gliding effortlessly past veteran defenders to score.
He looked incredible in that match.
He really did. And then you had Sebastian Berhalter hitting an absolute rocket. So, I mean, it looked on paper like the U.S. was peaking perfectly. But I have to push back a little on this whole luxury of rest idea.
Okay, what's your concern there?
Well, you look at this U.S. squad, and they haven't played a truly competitive do-or-die game where their tournament life was on the line in literally 3 years.
That's a fair point.
Right. So when they inevitably go down a goal in a knockout match, won't they just panic? I mean, doesn't the lack of high-stakes qualifiers leave them completely undercooked for the real thing?
Well, you're right to be concerned about the psychological shock of sudden elimination pressure, for sure. But if we look at the tactical and physical mechanics, preserving those legs might actually outweigh the lack of battle scars.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the U.S. has allowed their golden generation, so players like Christian Pulisic, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, to mature physically without accumulating the chronic injuries that come from the South American qualifiers.
Which Uruguay had to endure.
Exactly. Uruguay's qualification path is essentially a brutal marathon. I mean, they are flying to extreme altitudes in Bolivia one week and then playing in the suffocating hostile heat of Colombia the next.
It sounds miserable, honestly.
It is. So yes, Uruguay is profoundly battle-tested, but they also have a tremendous amount of miles on their tires. The U.S. basically used the last 2 years to build a very specific tactical identity in a completely controlled environment.
Which brings us to the masterminds actually dictating that identity from the touchline. Because, a rested team only goes as far as this tactical blueprint.
Right.
And here is where the narrative gets incredibly layered.
Right.
Because the U.S. coach, Mauricio Pochettino, is actually a direct tactical disciple of Uruguay's coach, Marcelo Bielsa.
It is so poetic. It is the ultimate student versus master scenario.
It literally is.
I mean, Pochettino literally played under Bielsa at Newell's Old Boys in Argentina and later for the Argentine national team. She basically belongs to the Bielsista School of Football.
Yeah, and you can absolutely see that DNA in how the U.S. plays now. I mean, Pochettino demands this high-intensity, vertical pressing game.
Very aggressive.
Super aggressive. They usually line up on paper in a standard 4-3-3, but the mechanics change completely when they actually get the ball. In possession, they dynamically shift into a 3-4-2-1.
They do, yeah.
Let's break that down for a second, though, because those numbers can sound like alphabet soup to a lot of people. When they shift into that 3-4-2-1, what is actually happening on the grass?
That's a great point. Let's clarify that. So essentially, when the U.S. gets the ball, one of their outside defenders, usually Anton Robinson on the left side, sprints forward to act as an attacking winger.
Right.
And then the remaining 3 defenders slide over and pinch together to form a tight back 3.
Got it.
This allows the U.S. to flood the middle of the field with bodies, which creates all these passing triangles and completely overwhelms the opponent's midfield. Pochettino is really trying to instill this aggressive, proactive, European club-level mentality into a very youthful squad.
He's constantly pushing them to ask, why not us?
Right, exactly. It's a very front-foot mentality.
It's an inspiring mentality, for sure. But then you look across the pitch at his old mentor. I mean, Bielsa has taken over Uruguay and basically fused his own demanding, high-octane style with traditional Garra Chirrua.
Yes, that legendary fighting spirit.
Yeah, that almost mythical Uruguayan fighting spirit that values grit and tenacity above absolutely everything else.
And Bielsa applies that spirit so systematically. He demands rapid transitions, meaning the absolute second Uruguay wins the ball back, they don't look to just pass it around the back and calm things down.
No, not at all.
Right. They look to go straight for the opponent's throat before the defense can even set up. And then defensively, he implements what are called intense man-to-man persecutions.
Persecutions, wow.
It's intense. Instead of guarding a zone on the field, a player like Federico Valverde might be instructed to literally stalk an opposing key midfielder across every single inch of the pitch.
Just completely abandoning the team's structural shape to neutralize one guy.
Exactly, just to take away that specific threat.
So if Pochettino wants to execute this chaotic vertical press with his young squad, isn't he just walking straight into a trap? I mean, can the youthful American squad really out Bielsa, the man who practically invented the system?
Well, they would be walking into a trap, except Bielsa has actually tweaked his philosophy quite a bit in his older age. He's become far more pragmatic recently.
Really? How so?
In recent competitive matches, we've actually seen Uruguay willingly drop into a solid mid-block.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so that means instead of pressing high up the field all game long like a typical Bielsa team, they pull their players back near the midfield line, they compress all the available space, concede possession to the opponent, and basically dare them to try and pass through a brick wall.
Wow, okay.
So the contrast isn't really about two identical pressing systems colliding anymore. It's really about mindset. It's the physical athleticism and sheer optimism of the U.S. against the deep, cynical, deeply experienced tactical knowledge of Uruguay.
Man, to really visualize how that mindset clash plays out, we have to look at the personnel, I think. How do these grand philosophies translate to the actual starting lineups?
Yeah, let's look at the players.
But before we dive into the specific player matchups, just a really quick reminder. If you want to put your own analytical skills to the test, please subscribe to the channel and enter our match prediction challenge.
It was so fun to play along.
It really is. And again, it is completely free to enter, and the prize money is funded entirely by the channel's profits, not out of anyone's entry fees. All right, so let's look at the engine rooms for these two squads.
Okay, so for the United States, the expected starting 11 really highlights their sheer athletic profile. You're looking at Matt Freese in goal, who has confidently pushed his way into the starting spot.
He's been great.
He has. Then a backline featuring Sergino Dest, Chris Richards, the veteran Tim Ream, and Antonee Robinson.
And the dynamic between Dest and Robinson on the wings is so crucial because they both absolutely love to push incredibly high up the field to join the attack.
Which is undoubtedly their greatest strength, but it also sets up their biggest vulnerability, which we will definitely get to in a minute.
Right.
In front of them, you have the famous MMA midfield core. So that's Tyler Adams acting as the defensive anchor, Weston McKennie operating as this box-to-box physical presence, and Malik Tillman bringing the creative spark to link the midfield to the attack.
Although Yunus Musa or Gio Reyna could easily slot in there depending on the tactical need.
Exactly. Lots of depth there. And then up top, the attack is spearheaded by Christian Pulisic, Folarin Balogun, and Tim Way.
Okay, now let's look at Uruguay's roster. And, I mean, the first thing that jumps out to me is the sheer institutional memory this team has. They're bringing back 39-year-old Fernando Muslera in goal for his 5th World Cup.
His 5th. The experience there is just staggering. But, equally notable is who Bielsa actually decided to leave at home.
Oh, right.
Another 39-year-old, the legendary Luis Suarez. He practically begged the media to be included for one last tournament ride, but Bielsa completely ignored his pleas.
That's ruthless.
It is, but it shows Bielsa is building a machine for today, not some kind of tribute act. So in front of Muslera, you have a terrifying physical backline anchored by Ronald Araujo and Matthias Oliveira.
Terrifying is the right word.
Yeah. And then you have a midfield that is completely bossed by Manuel Ugarte, whose entire job is basically destroying the opponent's plays. And Federico Valverde, who has the stamina of an Olympic marathon runner and does virtually everything else.
He's everywhere.
He really is. And finally, the attack features the unpredictable chaos of Darwin Núñez, paired with the sheer pace of Maximiliano Araujo.
Okay, so when you lay it out like that side by side, you really start to see where the tactical cracks might appear. I mean, if we look at the U.S., their strength right now is just incredible depth at the striker position.
Oh, absolutely.
Between Balogun, Ricardo Pepi, and Haji Wright, I think those three combined for 56 club goals this past season. Plus, the overall physical sprinting speed of the U.S. team is just really hard for anyone to match. But your weakness, I mean, it has to be the center of that defense.
Yeah. It definitely is. Specifically, it's the lack of recovery pace when they lose the ball. We talked about how Pochettino likes his outside defenders to push way up high.
Yeah.
Well, when they do that, they leave the center backs on an absolute island. So if the U.S. plays a high defensive line, a 38-year-old Tim Ream, despite his absolute brilliant ability to read the game, he becomes incredibly vulnerable.
Right, because if an opponent plays a quick long ball over the top of the defense, Ream simply doesn't have the foot speed to turn and catch a 22-year-old striker anymore.
Exactly. Furthermore, the U.S. historically really struggles to break down teams that just sit back. If a team refuses to engage and just packs the penalty box, the U.S. tends to get stuck passing the ball in this harmless horseshoe shape around the perimeter without ever actually penetrating the defense.
And if the U.S. struggles against teams that sit back and absorb pressure, Uruguay might just be their ultimate nightmare.
Yeah.
Because Uruguay's biggest asset isn't necessarily dominating the ball, it's their lethal efficiency when the game stops.
Yes. Dead ball situations.
I was looking at their expected goals from set pieces, their set piece XG, and the numbers are just mind-blowing.
Yeah, to give the listener some context here, expected goals, or XG, is basically a stat that measures the quality of a scoring chance. The global average for national teams generating expected goals from dead ball situations like corners and free kicks is about 0.20 per game.
Okay.
Uruguay's set-piece XG sits between 0.35 and 0.40.
Wait, they are nearly doubling the global average.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow. It is essentially a dead ball tax that every single opponent inevitably has to pay against them.
Right.
And this really worries me for the U.S. because the Americans typically use a zonal marking system on corner kicks.
Right.
Rather than man-to-man.
Yeah. So instead of assigning one defender to follow one attacker everywhere, the U.S. defenders just guard specific patches of grass in the penalty box. How does a young American defender standing completely still in his zone cope with a physical monster like Ronald Araujo taking a 10-yard running start and launching himself at the ball from the blind side?
It's a huge mismatch. It feels like zonal marking is just asking to be punished by that level of coordinated aggression.
Well, that specific scenario highlights exactly where Uruguay's maturity becomes an actual weapon.
Mm.
When you look at the core of the Uruguayan team, guys like Valverde, Núñez, Araujo, Ugarte, they are all sitting in what analysts call the depth window.
What exactly is the depth window?
It means they are generally between 24 and 29 years old, so they are in their absolute physical athletic prime, right? But they also have the mental maturity and composure to win those decisive, grinding moments that decide tight matches.
Right.
The U.S. squad is incredibly talented, but they lean much younger, heavily into their early 20s. And historically, younger teams are prone to split-second lapses in concentration.
And that's all it takes.
Exactly. A single missed assignment on a 75th minute corner kick is all it takes for a mature team like Uruguay to just end your tournament.
Which brings us to a media narrative that drives me absolutely crazy, and I know it bothers the analytics community too. If you read mainstream sports coverage or listen to casual fans, everyone just keeps slapping this dark horse label on Uruguay for 2026.
Oh, it is arguably the most frustrating and inaccurate label in modern football discourse.
It really is, and I think we have to elevate the conversation here. American fans in particular are basically raised on a diet of Premier League highlight reels.
Yes.
They look for flashy superstars doing stepovers, or teams that hold 70% of possession all game.
Yeah.
And because Uruguay doesn't play pretty, possession-obsessed soccer like Manchester City, and because they don't have a singular global megastar like Mbappe, fans just misunderstand them.
Completely.
They assumed Uruguay is just some plucky, obscure underdog hoping to get lucky.
Right. They misread Uruguay's structural edges as luck. And one of the biggest structural edges Uruguay has in 2026, which almost no one is talking about, is geography. Yes. The vast geography of North America is a massive advantage for Uruguay over almost anyone else in the tournament.
See, that sounds completely counterintuitive at first.
Yeah.
How does playing a tournament in North America benefit a South American team more than the actual North American hosts?
It all comes down to altitude and environmental adaptation. Over half of Uruguay's core squad has played 20 to 25 highly competitive matches at altitudes above 1,500 meters.
Wow.
Yeah, they regularly play World Cup qualifiers in La Paz, Bolivia, or Quito, Ecuador. And when you play at those heights, your blood carries less oxygen, your muscles burn way faster, and recovery takes much longer.
Right.
The Uruguayan players know exactly how their bodies react when the oxygen gets thin. But the United States core, because they mostly play their club football in Europe or at sea level in MLS, they have played maybe 0 to 5 matches at those extreme altitudes.
Ah, I see. So when the tournament shifts to a venue like the legendary Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, which is sitting at, what, over 2,200 meters?
Down there, yeah.
The U.S. players are going to be absolutely sucking wind and struggling to recover, while the Uruguayans will just treat it like a normal Tuesday.
Precisely. Uruguay is geographically adapted to the extremes of the host continent. And when opposing teams get physically exhausted by the altitude, that is exactly when Uruguay activates a tactical concept their fans call modo candado.
Lock mode.
Lock mode. And it's not just parking the bus. Once Uruguay scores and takes the lead, they act like a tactical boa constrictor.
That is a terrifying image.
It's accurate, though. They don't necessarily outrun you. They just slowly suffocate all the available space until you make a mistake. They masterfully weaponize time wasting. They use highly intelligent tactical fouls to completely shatter the opponent's rhythm.
Yeah.
After the 70th minute in competitive matches when they hold a lead, Uruguay's defensive structure becomes so impenetrable that they concede less than 0.10 expected goals.
That's basically zero.
They basically reduce the opponent's chances to absolute zero, yes.
They just strangle the life out of the match. And it makes opposing fans so furious because they just don't understand it. I mean, remember the Grabma internet incident a while back?
Oh, yeah, the WWE stuff.
Yeah. Darwin Núñez got tangled up in the penalty box, aggressively grappling with a defender, and U.S. fans were posting the clips online calling it WWE moves. They were treating it like this massive scandal of unfair play.
Which is so funny.
They completely missed the point. I mean, this isn't cheating. This is standard, road-tested tournament nastiness. Fans are basically confusing ugly soccer with winning soccer.
Exactly.
But let me push back on this strategy for a second. If Uruguay's entire identity relies on this modo candado to protect a lead, aren't they incredibly vulnerable if they concede the first goal? Like, if the U.S. scores early, does Uruguay even have a plan B?
That is the crucial question, but this is exactly where their rotational spine proves their elite status. Uruguay's upside isn't based on one superstar having a magical month, where if you shut that player down, the whole team collapses. They have a deeply ingrained system that survives rotation and survives going behind. If they need to chase a game, Bielsa has them drilled to instantly increase the tempo of their pressing and their vertical passing. They aren't a Cinderella story relying on fairy dust, you know. They are a Tier 1 spoiler built to survive high-pressure scenarios.
Okay, so taking all of this into account, right? The tactical chess match between Pochettino and Bielsa, the specific player matchups, the inevitable set-piece tax, the massive altitude advantage, and the contrasting mindsets. The ultimate question remains, can either of these squads actually reach the final in July?
Let's analytically assess the United States first. Realistically, reaching the final is an extreme long shot for the U.S.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The home crowd is undeniably a massive emotional and psychological boost that can carry a team through a really tough moment. But their ceiling realistically is the quarterfinals or semifinal.
And is that entirely because of the vulnerabilities in the backline we talked about?
Largely, yes. I mean, to reach the final, the U.S. would have to beat multiple heavyweights back-to-back in the knockout rounds. You're talking about surviving a gauntlet of France, then maybe Brazil, then England.
That's brutal.
Over the course of 3 matches against elite opposition, the lack of deep tournament experience will absolutely show. And eventually, a team with world-class wingers is going to isolate and expose that slower central defense. The U.S. has the raw talent to make a deep run, but stringing together 3 flawless tactical games against the world's best is a massive ask for a young squad.
Right. And what about Uruguay? I mean, if the data proves they aren't a dark horse, what is their actual tournament ceiling?
Uruguay is what analysts call a mispriced contender. Because of their age curve peaking right now, their profound adaptation to the high altitude, and that absolute lethality on set pieces, they are perfectly built for the brutal reality of knockout football.
They really are.
They are structurally designed to knock out traditional favorites who might arrogantly overlook them. Winning the entire World Cup is always incredibly difficult, but they are structurally sound enough that a deep run to the semifinals or the final wouldn't be a miracle at all.
It wouldn't be a fluke.
No, it wouldn't be a fluke. It would simply be the logical outcome of how the team was methodically built.
It is such a fascinating contrast. You know, the U.S. has the raw, explosive talent, the optimism of youth, and the deafening roar of the home crowd pushing them forward. But Uruguay has the dark arts.
They do.
They have the maturity and the structural DNA of a tournament killer that knows exactly how to survive when the environment turns hostile.
And if we pull back and look at the bigger picture of knockout football, aesthetics simply don't matter. It doesn't matter who played the prettiest passes or who dominated possession metrics.
Not at all.
It comes down to who can survive the final 20 minutes of a high-pressure match in an intense, boiling urban environment like Mexico City or Los Angeles, who makes fewer structural mistakes when the legs are heavy and the oxygen is thin. That is exactly where World Cups are won and lost.
It really puts the entire scale of this tournament into perspective. Well, before we wrap up today's deep dive, we want to remind you one final time to subscribe to the channel and join our prediction challenge.
Yes, please do.
And we want to explicitly clarify to you, we are not a betting platform. Entering the contest and subscribing to the channel is totally free. The prize money comes directly from our channel's profits, not from any contestants. We just want to build a community that loves analyzing the intricacies of the game as much as we do.
It is shaping up to be an absolutely incredible summer of football.
It really is. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as we get closer to the tournament kickoff. If the United States does manage to navigate their way deep into the knockout rounds, and they find themselves staring across the tunnel at Uruguay, will Mauricio Pochettino have to completely abandon his Bielsa-inspired ideals of beautiful, high-pressing football and actually embrace playing ugly just to survive against the ultimate masters of the dark arts?